All right, the webinar is now live. Hi, everyone. I see we have folks starting to trickle in to today's lunchroom. Welcome. It's a beautiful day here in Somerville, Massachusetts. So happy to have everyone with us. I'm Mark Lunsford. I take he, him, his pronouns. I'm the artistic producer here at the A.R.T. And right at the top, I just want to acknowledge that the land on which Oberon and the Loeb Drama Center sit, the performance venues for the A.R.T., is the traditional ancestral home of the Massachusetts people. And I am calling today from Somerville, Massachusetts, which is the traditional ancestral home of the Pawtucket people. I'm feeling very lonely here on this Zoom screen with you all today, but I know there are so many of you there watching and so excited to have you. I want to let everyone know that the chat is disabled today, but you can submit questions through the Q&A function, and I'll be moderating that a little bit later in this afternoon's conversation. Also, to let everyone know that there are live subtitles available. So for some of you, you may see the live transcript button already available in your toolbar near the sort of center right, or you may click on the three dots more, and you'll see the option there to enable transcripts if you'd like to use that feature. I'd also just like to share for all of our audiences our audience code of conduct. A.R.T. is unequivocally opposed to hate and centers anti-racism as a core value. We expect everyone in the A.R.T. community, including our audiences, to uphold these values. And as such, we will not tolerate anti-Blackness or racism of any kind in our buildings, nor at our online events. We aim to create an environment that is uninhabitable to racism and discrimination, and where all BIPOC staff, artists, volunteers, audience, and community are seen, heard, valued, and provided the opportunity to thrive. This work is only possible when we do it together. Thank you for being our partner in it. Also, before I forget to do my audio description, I'm a white man wearing a black polo, sort of buttoned to the top, with a brown beard and closely cropped brown hair. So we're here today, if you can believe it, on the 1-year anniversary of the lunchroom, which is kind of hard to believe. There's so many ways in which we've been marking a year and reflecting on a year that has impacted all of us in so many different ways. Even you can see I'm kind of loading out the lunchroom set, as they would say, as I prepare to move apartments this week. So this is also the last lunchroom you'll see coming from my home here in Somerville. But anyway, as we were reflecting on how to really mark this anniversary of this program that we've all come to love so much, we really thought that the conversation could be exciting to talk through what we've been stewing on artistically, what we've been reflecting on artistically, and kind of what we think is ahead for us. And I thought there's no better folks to have that conversation with me than our senior advisor for civic engagement and strategic partnerships, Dayron Miles, and our artistic director, Diane Paulus. So I'd love for both of them to join me in the lunchroom now.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, friends. We really we didn't plan it, but we coordinated our sort of stage blacks wardrobe.
Yes,
Mark, you're going to have to take a picture of your background so you can zoom in that background. Come to know it for a year. You're very regular. You sit in the same place for whether it's the lunchroom or Zoom meetings at A.R.T. Background. We're going to miss it.
I know. It's going to be that. I guess that's the 1-year gift we're giving to the lunchroom is a scenery upgrade. At least I hope it'll be. If you could both just introduce yourselves to our audience.
Yes, I'll start if that's cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Dayron J. Miles. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am calling in from Boston, Massachusetts, the unceded territory of the Massachusetts people. And by way of people acknowledgement, before I even say anything else, I just want to name right now in our country, there's a trial going on. And it's the trial of Derek Chauvin. And I don't say that to invoke his name, but I know for me and many Black people across this country, the state-sanctioned slaughter of Black people is something that we've wrestled with for a long time. And so I know that there are communities watching this trial, and I just want to name that I'm part of that community, and I stand in solidarity with my Black people. And I think we are waiting to see if all of the protests from our allies from around the world, if you all are still going to show up as we fight for justice. And so I'm just naming that to start off. I get to serve as the Senior Advisor for Civic Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at the A.R.T. at Harvard University, a role that I am so proud to have. And so thank you all.
Thank you for that, Dayron, and lifting all of that that is happening as we gather here today, like in real time, that's going on, and amplifying that. I'm Diane Paulus. I take the She series for audio description. I am Asian American. I have brown hair, green eyes. I wear my glasses on my head. I'm sitting behind kind of a generic white wall there in a little window, get some sunlight as we can. And I am calling in from the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people. And really happy to be here with Dayron and Mark for this conversation.
Can I just give my audio description? Because I neglected to do that. I'm a Black man wearing all Black with a Black beret. Because again, continued fight for Black liberation is real. So, hello.
I'm so happy to be with both of you in this conversation today because I think, you know, we've had so many honest and direct conversations institutionally, and the three of us in particular have had so many sort of deep and honest conversations with each other over the last year. And I think it's such a great time to, you know, sort of reflect on that and see both how it's affected us as people and how we're moving that forward institutionally as well. I've also been reflecting a lot on the fact that June will be my 10-year anniversary at A.R.T, which doesn't seem quite possible. But you know, it causes one to like think through their history a lot, and especially with the company. And Diane, I was just thinking, I have one very specific memory that I actually don't know if I've ever shared with you, but you know, when I came to A.R.T, I came as the company manager. I had no company management experience, and I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get a job there. I don't know what job I'm going to get there, but that's the theater where I need to work, right? And a huge part of that was because I was such a fan of your work. I'd seen Hair on Broadway maybe the year prior to that. But I remember being in an all-staff meeting. I think it was in my first year, and we were about to go into our second season. And I was like, I love working at A.R.T. Work's so cool, such edgy stuff, da, 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 da. And you were sharing the season with us, and you're like, and next season we're going to do Pippin and Glass Menagerie. And I remember thinking like, oh my. But then, of course, they were both such incredibly revelatory, groundbreaking productions that, you know, it really secured for me why I had come here. But I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I definitely sat in there like, huh.
You have not told me that, but I can appreciate thinking like, what? But, you know, part of what we do, right, is we revisit classics and give them a new point of view. And so I think a lot of people had that reaction to Pippin, and that was part of my interest, was like, I'm going to do Pippin in a way you've never seen Pippin before. You know, yeah.
It also had me, Dayron, thinking, so Dayron and I have known each other for a very long time, prior to A.R.T. And I was saying to someone the other day, like, we've known each other for 10 years, but we've actually known each other for long, like 13 years, I think.
I think we're going on 13 if we're not there yet. Yeah. I think it's 13 like right now. I think we're 13 in a month or something.
Yeah. And Dayron and I are both from Ohio, did not meet in Ohio. But I was in graduate school at Florida State, and Dayron was working at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta. And we had a great friend in common, Kate Holst, who introduced us. And we were just like, you know, young theater things 13 years ago. But we were like, we are going to work together someday and like do really, really amazing things.
Absolutely. Mark, you probably don't know this, but I remember first of all, the Alliance Theater, shout out to the Alliance Theater and Jody Feldman, who is a dear mentor, and Susan Booth. Those are my people. Mark, I was negotiating for a job at the Alliance. Susan had offered me this job in community engagement. I didn't even know what that was. I was like, what is that? And so I was like, oh, they want me to work here. I had a job lined up in New York City. And so I felt like I had some bargaining chips. So I was like, I'm going to negotiate. So I called you. I don't know if you remember. I called you and was like, okay, Susan made me an offer. What do I ask for? And you were like, I'm not sure, but you definitely want to go to TCG. Do you remember this? And I was like, what is TCG? Tell me everything. And then you told me about Theater Communications Group and about the annual conference. And so I went into work the next day and I said, I'll take this job, but I need to go to TCG every year and I need to go starting like in a couple of weeks. And Susan thought that was a great idea. And I didn't know it, but she had just been announced as the president of the board of TCG. And so the Alliance sent me to TCG that first year. I think it was in Baltimore. And you, me, and Kate stayed in the same hotel room. I don't know if you remember, but it was a great experience. And TCG has supported me in my career ever since. So shout out to TCG and all my friends over there.
It's also, one of the most exciting things, right? Because Diane was sort of articulating this position that you're in now, Dayron. And I remember just thinking, like, this is Dayron. This is Dayron. This job is Dayron. Right? And then I remember the two of you, I wasn't there, but the two of you met in New York. And like, I was lucky enough to get to hear both your reactions to that meeting, which were like incredibly exciting. But I wonder if the two of you can talk to me about like that first coffee together in New York City.
Well, I think before we jump into it, I have to say, though, like, I also was a Diane Paulus fan, which you definitely know, because when you got the job at A.R.T, I had a meltdown. I was like, wait, what? And so I was a fan of Diane. And so, I was Theater Forward. Shout out to Theater Forward, such a great group that supports so much work all over the country. Theater Forward supported the program that I was fortunate enough to found and run in Dallas, Public Works Dallas, at the Dallas Theater Center. They asked me to come and join a panel with Joe Iconis and I think Regina Taylor and someone else. And we were talking about the role of community in theater. And I found out that Diane Paulus was going to be there. And I was like, wait, what? And then a couple of days later, we had breakfast. And what Diane doesn't know, I don't think, is a couple of days before this meeting, Shirley Bryce Heath, the amazing Shirley Bryce Heath, one of the architects of the Public Works program, a linguistic anthropologist from Stanford, and the lead researcher for Public Works Dallas, the program I just mentioned at the Dallas Theater Center, had just issued this report. And in this report, examining the work that we had done with community in Dallas, we found out that the senior citizens who were a part of our experience, a lot of them hadn't gotten their eyes checked in years, but because they were suddenly in a show, had the opportunity or wanted to be able to read their scripts the next year. And so a lot of them went and got their eyes checked. Folks started to go into physical therapy so that they wouldn't have to use their canes and have more stage mobility. And so as we started to examine the data, what emerged was clearly health benefits for participants. And so, I was starting to kick around in my head, and I had conversations about this with Lear DeBessene, a dear friend, my mentor in the field, I would say, about these benefits. And so I started to think, if these health benefits could happen on the micro, what would happen if we expanded that to community? What could be the community impact? So if we got like 50,000 people versus 5 to just want to go get their eyes checked, what would that mean for our communities? And so I was like, man, theater and public health, there's this amazing intersection that we should excavate. Fast forward 3 days later, I'm sitting across from Diane Paulus, trying not to like vomit because I'm so nervous and excited at the same time. And, she sits down and she starts to talk about what she wants to do in Boston, this idea of theater as public health. And she didn't know I had just read this report. She didn't know Leah and I had just had this conversation. And I sort of freaked out. And that's where it was, Diane, which is why my jaw was on the floor during breakfast. So, yeah.
Well,
Wow, we never talked about that.
All these memories. And I remember that panel that you described, Dayron. It was like in the Steinway.
It was in the Steinway, yeah.
Steinway building where they sell the Steinway piano.
Pianos, yeah.
In their concert hall. And I remember hearing you on that panel and your energy and your articulation and just bringing the whole room like alive, and then getting to meet you a few days later. And of course, I had heard about you and I had known about you before our meeting from Mark and other staff who had known you and worked with you and known about your incredible tenure at the Alliance. I think it was when we had first started to think about putting our prop project together. The very first beginning of it was on the Emancipation Proclamation. And we were reaching out to the Alliance to understand how that program worked and sort of partnering with the Alliance to prototype that version in Boston through A.R.T. And that was, I think, you and your program at the Alliance. So, your impact on A.R.T. was happening even before you came to us.
I can't take credit for that program. That program was, I think it was Susan Booth's brainchild, but I was leading our participation in the Civil War project with a colleague. And that is where that collaboration emerged. So it was my first time engaging with A.R.T. on a professional level. Wow, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was
2013. Yeah,
early on, a couple years or into Mark when you and I started A.R.T.
2013.
Yeah, I think Crossing was sort of one of the final projects actually in
that Civil War, when we were doing the kind of all the work that was catalyzed by the 150th anniversary. So yes, I will never forget that breakfast. And it's so striking to me that we had that conversation, Dayron, about public health as an animating idea for theater, for the American theater, for what we could contribute at A.R.T. And then you came to A.R.T. You did a couple of months, and then the largest public health pandemic in our lifetime has happened. So I've just done a lot of reflecting about this interest in public health and how that has shifted and changed and been informed because of what we've been through in this last year, and expanding what I thought I knew about public health, right? Which was more of an intuition and a feeling, and thinking about all the impact that I know happens when we do theater. But hearing, the stories of that data that you got from Dallas Public Works, Dayron, is so like affirming and exciting. And it just makes me feel like, oh my goodness, like we have to be, back in that participation of making theater and in person and with our bodies. But also just the understanding what it means to be dedicated to public health and opening up that definition to include racism as a public health epidemic, to understand what it is we've been interrogating at A.R.T. over this last year, looking at our own institution, our own practice, our own culture. And I know for our staff, to think and talk about public health as an initiative, it has to be holistic and include our staff well-being. And I think for every institution, in the country, the idea of the well-being and the humanity and grace with which we've had to get through this together is been kind of pushed to the forefront. And I think, Mark, as you said, it's a 1-year anniversary of the lunchroom, what we've been through, what we're looking forward to. We're in this moment with the possibility of reopening, kind of like glimmers happening in a very exciting way. And yet I do sense like the anxiety, right? I mean, you read articles in the paper about just general anxiety about coming back too quickly, coming back at all. What does it mean to just the ritual of coming out of socialized isolation? And I know I'm really hearing, our staff at A.R.T say, well, great, we've done all this reflection, we've done this work, we've committed to a change. What's going to happen when we're back? How are we going to live the learnings and continue to not continue, but just revert back, right? What is the new future going to be? How are we not going to fall into business as usual? So anyway, that was a bit of a discursive thing, but I just pulled, everything together of what we've been, how we launched this lunchroom, just the history of A.R.T, where we are now, what matters, right? What our priorities are, and what we've learned. And Dayron, I've really taken from you. I remember not our first meeting, but pretty much early on, you kept talking about a value-driven process. And, we were talking about that being sort of one really amazing, huge thing that we should be doing at A.R.T, like codifying our values, articulating our charter of values to guide our decision-making process. And again, the pandemic hit. So how are we going to do that when we're not in person? And then, finding our way through that. But one of our now articulated values being inquiry, and just, I think you were the one that posed a phrase of like, I don't have it off the top of my tongue, like the continual commitment to something learning, but it's
lifelong learning. It's all about lifelong learning.
Yes, yes. So, this idea that we're never going to be done, we're never checking a box in this process. We're committed to a lifelong learning and inquiry.
Not to be redundant, but you'll start to see how I think my past work, the civic practice, the public works of it all is a real motif in my practice. And so I think, I can tie that value or at least me articulating the want and desire for us to rally around a commitment to lifelong questioning and a lifelong discovery and lifelong exploration. Back to what I opened with, thinking about those senior citizens in Public Works Dallas and their continued discovery. They were 80 years old, 90 years old, and continuing to learn and putting themselves in the position to do that and expecting to learn. They would come at 89 years old, 90, knowing everything. Let's be real. They've seen the world change how many times, but they showed up in our workshops and expected to discover something new, something that they hadn't done before. And I was so inspired by that. That same inalienable creative curiosity, let's call it curiosity, the part of the human being that starts well before our senior years, but starts in our infancy. It reminded me of the workshops that we were having with young people, that expectation that I'm going to leave here knowing something I didn't. We habituate that in kids. It's called school. You know what I mean? And then something happens and we don't expect to learn. So what would it mean if we as artists, what would it mean if we as A.R.T, what would it mean if we as Harvard assumed the posture of perpetual pupil?
So it's interesting, Darren, because as you talk about that, like it pulls from me a word that I feel like has been used a lot in this year, which is essential, right? And like there's been a lot of reflection, I think, for those of us in artistic practice about our essentiality, essentialness, right, to the pandemic. But I think what you're both pulling on, right, is in line with this question I've had, or really sort of responsibility, I think, that is being felt, where we might not be essential right now. The essential thing is that we stay home, we wear a mask, we do what we need to do. We deepen learning, especially for white folks. We're like deepening learning and challenging long-held racist ideas, right? That we're using this time to really do a lot of work. When we come out of this moment, post-vaccine, whatever, there is this responsibility I think about a lot as folks in an artistic practice to provide catharsis, to help, like, tell story and build community in a way that helps us process so many things that we've just been through, not even just in the last year. The last year has done so much to illuminate much that has been existing for a very long time. And so I think a lot of these conversations we're having center around that like responsibility as storytellers that we have in community, that we have to our audiences, that we have to sort of provide a place to really think about this.
And I would say, Mark, it's even more than the storytelling, right? It's also just simply the form that the theater can offer of collective presence, right? Because that's something we just haven't had. It's really crazy to think about. The idea of being together and being in the same space is something we have not been able to do, right? And by the way, we are continuing that, right? Like at this moment, right? Even though we're vaccinating more every day, this plea on the part of our scientists that are now guiding our country to just hold on, like let's not take our masks off yet, we need to be in this space. But when we are allowed, like the theater, I think of all the art forms is so uniquely positioned because we are about embodied presence and ritual space. So how are we going to use that and serve a function, like really be essential in that sense to the transition from social isolation to being together again?
It's so interesting to me because like I said, I'm new to A.R.T, newish, and I'm new to Boston. I love this city. It's a city I've always wanted to live in. Y'all remember how excited I was to move here. And so being in isolation, being in quarantine in a new community is lonely. It's lonely. It's a very lonely thing. And I think for somebody like me who spends so much time in community and gets everything I need, I get exhausted by community, but they also energize me. Like it's my cause and cure. It's my purpose. I didn't know how I would emerge from this. I didn't know how I would find my humanity again. There are moments in my house. There have been moments throughout the year where I completely have not felt like myself. I'm being really transparent here, so just name that. And any of my friends who are watching know what I'm talking about. It got scary, and something you just said, Diane, became my hope. Long ago, when human beings were hunters and gatherers, the same person that you went to hear the stories, the same person that you went to receive the oral histories, is the same person you went to when you were sick. It was the shaman in that kind of organization. And to me, what this period of isolation, what this period of disparate reflection has provided for us is the opportunity to go back to basics, the opportunity to go back to our humanity in a way. There's something about going back to your default, and we are essential. Like the artisans, our artists, the artists of the culture bearers, the cultural custodians of humanity are essential now because we are the shamans. And I think when we remember that, then this idea, this notion of public health and art making, this idea or intersection of healing and catharsis is suddenly not so disparate, but we remember and realize that it comes from the same source. Mm-hmm. And that's been really encouraging to me in this time.
Diane, do you remember one of the first conversations we had about public health as an artistic team? We got on this riff about like pulling people out of their digital isolation, right? Like we need to pull people out of their phones, pull them out of their tablets, bring them to the theater. Yeah. A year later, we've been shoved deeply into our digital isolation. But I think that loneliness is a big part of it. I think absolutely what you're saying, Dayron, like moving to a new city and then being alone in that city is like so strange, but it also is like revealing. Being in a city for 10 years and being alone is like that. and we're single in our 30s. So
Wow.
any grandmas or moms watching, you've got a
Look
nice
it up.
follow up efforts. But yeah, I think that it's really what you were just saying, Diane, about the collective experience too, right? Like pulling us out of that loneliness to be an audience with one another.
I think it's like I've been thinking a lot about reading over the course of the pandemic that what people have been missing, because like actually a lot of people have found themselves very connected to family, right? They're having more Zoom meetings with family across the country, or Zoom reunions with high school friends, or the technology in a way has afforded people to reach out. But what we have missed is the chance encounter. The it's all mediated because it's all planned, and you're invited to the Zoom thing and you sign up, but that thing of being metaphorically in a town square, and meeting people and being at your coffee shop, or what I imagine and dream of at A.R.T. and also for our new plans of our new home is how can we create a place we welcome. And I'm thinking a lot about the intergenerational piece of this, Dayron, that you mentioned, because when you were describing the data of old folks, it really touched me because I thought about what old people have gone through in this pandemic, the kind of crisis of like old people in nursing homes who, were disproportionately dying, right? When we look at the stats, and then people not able to even see old folks and having to say goodbye through cell phones, and just that, oh my God, the flip of that, of saying you're 89 and, yes, you can get rid of that cane and never thought you could move it again. So I'm just really touched by that. Like just the intergenerational, exchange and conversation. And I'm just reading this book by Robert Livingston, who's a Harvard professor. It's called The Social Conversation, I think. I'm getting it right. And he just talks about his experience and how vital it is to have conversation. The conversation is like at the heart. He writes very powerfully and eloquently about anti-racism and how to live that. I'm hoping I'm not freezing here. Sorry. But his thesis is about social conversation, about what happens when we actually connect. And I know, Dayron, you speak about this so constantly about building relationships and, how do we actually become authentically in each other's lives and, not about a transaction. And I think the whole way community engagement has been thought about at theaters, has evolved and needs to continue to evolve. And I know we're thinking about that, right? As we come back, like that's a reboot for us. That community is no longer kind of over here, but it's everything we're doing.
Well, Diane, actually, I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about this re-articulation, this codifying of values, because that's all we did. That's what we said. We looked at each other and said, this theater will center community. We said that, and our values reflect that. And so I think everything that we've been thinking about for the future does just that. You know what I mean? From performance spaces to artistic content to where we even invest our development dollars. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think the pandemic has given us an opportunity to sit around a fire, to sit in a circle and look at each other, right? And to lay bare not just the truth of who we are as individuals, the truth of who A.R.T. is as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think the future conversation is really interesting because, right, that's the other thing this year has made us do is I think it's broken us open to think about what is the next 50 years of A.R.T. and how have we thought about that? Or have we thought about that? Have we had to think about that, right? There's such a race, I think, in nonprofits to like, how do we not, we're all in this right now. How do we not have a deficit next year? Right. And so like the pressure of that sort of resourcing the short term always sort of feels like it impedes us from thinking in this way that's so much bigger and so much longer.
Wait, Mark, can I just say,
sorry,
I just want to speak to that though, because I think that is another gift that the pandemic has given us is suddenly it's not just, even if people are thinking, what are we going to be in 50 years? What are we going to be in 5 years? What at least the pandemic has given me is this question of what does community need right now? Do you know what I mean? Like, what does community need? Because again, going back to that shaman, ethos, the shaman was what the shaman needed to be. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I feel like that's kind of our commission, right? I feel like a part of the assignment that we have is to be, look, theater as an art form at its core is a reflection of humanity, right? An embodiment of the human experience. What does humanity need reflected? What does humanity need to examine? What does humanity need to see?
I wonder if it's worth talking about, this project that we're thinking about in the Arnold Arboretum, because it feels like that idea of coming back, really, look, we've been so active digitally, and I just have to shout out all the A.R.T staff who work so hard to continue all the engagement through all our programs, all the digital offerings, the live streams, the recorded events, Hype Man, our exciting capture of this incredible play that we've done with Company One that's going to be made available soon, shortly. April
8th. Yeah, April 8th. A little over.
Look, we've been so busy, but we are all looking forward to that moment where we can be together. Mm-hmm. And I think we were really thinking about what's the first thing we need to do? What is that ritual shamanistic offering? And we all felt, responsibly from a public health point of view, we needed to do this outdoors, and we needed to make this fully accessible. I wonder, Mark, Dayron, do you want to pick up on that since my internet's kind of going crazy? Look, maybe say more about, because I'm so excited about both of you have been working hard on that project.
Mark?
Yeah, great. It's very exciting. I think it comes back to the public health conversation, just as you were saying, Diane. What is it to be in these outdoor spaces? What is it to have nature and its healing capacity, be a home, be a venue, if for lack of a better term, for our work? It provides safety, and it also provides healing, which are two immediate benefits. We've got a great creative team together who are sort of working with us to help us think about this. Summer Williams, Kirsten Greenidge, Tim Hall, Jill Johnson, new and old friends who are just so, like, we don't even know what this is yet. It's going to be this incredible experience moving through the Arboretum, fusing artistic offerings and sharings with this incredible natural landscape, right? And there's just so much excitement in this team, sort of ruminating on the different things we can be discussing and all the different collaborators who can be contributing pieces and be a part of this. That I think it's been tossed around by several folks, but can really feel like a gift to community. And I think that's what's really exciting. Yeah, Dayron.
No, I just love that so much, Mark. And I think, again, we've been thinking about A.R.T's relationship to community. We've been thinking about our own individual relationships to and with community. And I think another gift that this Arboretum project gives us is the opportunity to imagine our relationship, as Ned would say, with these non-sentient beings who are also part of our community, who are as much a part of our community as we are, right? And so there's almost this.
Be clear, you're talking about, right, the non-sentient beings, the trees, the flowers. Just everybody wondering what beings.
Well, I mean, truly, again, it's one thing to do a land acknowledgement, but what does it mean to really acknowledge indigenous culture and Native American culture? Do you know what I mean? What is our relationship with trees? What is our truly not our transactional relationship. Like we cut that tree down, it gives us paper. No. What does it mean to be in relationship with this living being who was on this land before we arrived? Who, if we do our job right, will be on this land when we leave. What does that mean? What does it mean to, in a moment where humanity has been decimated by disease, to again return back to our origin and commune with the things that were here before us and will be here long after us?
Well, and what is the access to these green spaces in cities that have been redlined and segregated for decades, right? Who has access? How can people get to these spaces? What stories are told in these spaces, or what does their location say about the socioeconomic situation that they're surrounded by in an urban area? I think that's also sort of deeply implanted in what we want to talk about in the Arboretum.
Is there a correlation between the health benefits that these spaces provide and the lack of health resources in some of those communities? I mean, there's a lot to mine there. Don't get me started. You know me. We'll be on that for another lunchroom. It'll be dinner time. You hear me?
I was going to say, that's all.
I just want to quickly remind folks, I've got a couple more topics for us to discuss, but if you've got any questions, just drop them in the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye and be happy to moderate. I think, something else I'm thinking about when we go into next year, right? And like, we're still deep in the sort of planning process, whatever planning can mean right now, with so many things that are unknown. But I think in particular, in the short term, I think about these productions, 3 in particular, that sort of got frozen in time, right? 1776, Big Beth and Stride, Ocean Filibuster, these 3 projects that we were working on, and we just sort of had to say like, and sort of just like pull up on. And, particularly, I think a lot about the conversation in Macbeth and Stride that's like, and Ocean Filibuster. It's like, let's use this time, right? It's not that however we froze that project, we're just going to unfreeze it when we can have an audience. What does this year do to inform this piece now so it can still be present, right? And I think that's also like, Diane, I don't know if we lost you. I think you might be frozen, but I was sort of building to, how we deepened conversations around 1776 and haven't really stalled, but have taken the opportunity to dig in. Oh, she's back.
I don't know what's happening. Many apologies.
No worries. Diane, I was just sort of building up to like how, in particular as an artist, I think about when you've had a production postponed because of the pandemic, the ways in which you don't sit idle, right? It's not that you just stopped, sort of put the book down and you're just waiting to pick it back up once you can do the show, right? Like you've continued the thinking, deepened the thinking on 1776 as we look to sort of find the moment where we can bring that show to bear. I just wonder if you can talk a little bit from an artistic perspective, like how it affects your thinking when you're so ready to go and then you sit in this moment of sort of uncertainty.
Well, it's like everything else we've said about the pandemic, the disruption, just and the learning and the reflection and everything that's happened over this year. I mean, I think our role as artists is always to feed everything that we're going through as humans in relation to our society. It informs our work. I mean, that's why I chose, I think, a path of being an artist, because I felt like you could always include all of that into your work. There was no bifurcation, right? That you had to live your art and kind of feed it into your work. So, oh my goodness, with 1776, I feel like this year has, completely deepened what it means to do this production. I mean, it has just put it into such an intense space of trying to understand why we are where we are in America today by looking backwards, like this tension of how do we as artists help to understand and shift the gaze on our American history in a way that we can really reckon with it. Because if we don't do that, there's no chance we can step forward together. And, that's happening all around us. It's happening. Dayron and I have been involved in meetings, regarding Harvard's initiative to look at Harvard and its legacy of slavery. I mean, it's this enormous, complicated, necessary work. And for me, it's just feeding, educating, learning, deepening. And then it's, we do hope we can start to rehearse someday soon because, you want to put it into action, and so I think that's what's been, challenging, because there's a creative thing that happens when you're in your body. And I think that's the hardest thing about this pandemic, is that we just haven't been in that space where you're together and some other thing happens, that shaman thing, that it happens in theater. I mean, theater happens between people. That's theater. It doesn't happen in me or you. It's actually in the space between. And so how do we, when we can get back to that? And it's microcosms, right? It's in the space between me and a designer, or me and Jeffrey Page, right? Co-directing this. It's happening here. Then it moves to the designers. Then it moves to the performers. And then the ultimate space in between is between the audience and the performer, right? And it's like the metaphor of it growing. So we've just been in a prolonged state of, the smaller in-betweens, but it's public. I just want to put that word in, because we talked about public health, and I'm just noticing, like, it's public health. And there's something about the publicness of what we do as theater. It's public.
It's a republic art form. I mean, it is
a republic art form. Yes.
At its core.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for the two of you, actually inspired by that question and that response. Diane, again, being the newest ART employee on the call here, thinking about those three shows that are frozen in time and understanding that they either were programmed or inspired at a time when we hadn't institutionally codified or rallied around those newly articulated values. I wonder, examining those pieces, is it complete alignment? Is it complete resonance? And if not, how do you overcome or reckon with the dissonance, either thematically in the shows or as the shows have been resourced in terms of creative teams, budgets, any of that?
Yeah, I think looking at work that we've already developed and that we're really ready to go. I mean, we had a big artistic meeting yesterday where we went through everything that's coming down the pike and decided, is it at an early phase, a middle phase, is it ready to go? And these three, Mark, that you mentioned, were really, really ready to go, right? And thinking about, I think all of the value work we've done has sort of underscored, like, the generating kind of energy for each project. It's made us zoom in to the generating energy. And I think what it does, it makes you really think about what we're amplifying, what we're lifting, how we're supporting. When I think about Macbeth and Stride, and I think about the time that I've personally had to get to know Whitney White, who is the generative artist in that project. I know, Mark, you've worked closely with Whitney, and Dayron, you've known Whitney for years, and we've commissioned Whitney. But as artistic director, I've had more time just to get on a Zoom and talk to Whitney and get to know her and talk about her artistic dreams and life and all of that. So I feel like to support Whitney and really understand what Whitney and her creative team, Tabby and Tyler, what it is and how we can support, and also talking with that team and thinking about what does it mean to come out of the pandemic and how are we going to produce theater in a way that's sustainable and regenerative and reflects the learnings of the pandemic. And that's really exciting to me, is to speak to the artists that if there's one thing about this pandemic, the entire theater world is going through. It's not just, in one country. It's like the world, even though, our friends in Japan and Australia are back at theater, and we look at those examples for hope. But I think there's a sense of, institutionally, how can we invite artists to work at ART in a new way? That you're not just thinking about the show. Of course, the show is the generating impulse, but we're also thinking about the way we work, the process in which we work, the values that we're amplifying in the work, how we're collaborating across shows. I mean, these are all things that we're discussing for next season. How can we be really resourceful, because we know resources are tight and tough.
Mm.
It's hard times for our industry. It's hard times for many folks. How can we make the theater accessible and not assume that this is how we would do things? This is how we used to spend money. But do it in conversation with the artists, like really in conversation.
Yeah, I really want to amplify that point that you're making, Diane, because I think, again, there's so much that's deepening on each of these projects. And I think we've intentionally taken the time not to sit idle on them, but to think about them more directly and think about them more deeply and really, Katie Pearl and Lisa Demore shared a really exciting, and they have an event coming up, everyone, behind the scenes, April 6th. I'm going to say that. Sarah will correct me in the chat if I have said it incorrectly, where you're going to get to see the thing I'm about to describe. But they sent some sort of proof of concept pieces they've been working on from a design perspective that were just thrilling to watch yesterday. And you can see we're we haven't sat idly. We've taken the time to deepen. But I think, Dayron, pursuant to your question, and part of what Diane's bringing up is, I think the values of doing the values work, I think, for me, for these three projects, has shown that they are aligned with the values we've articulated. But what has happened, to Diane's point, is that they've also connected these three projects and the breadth of the work in a way that feels so much more intentional, right? So I feel, as a producer, that I can have much more informed conversations about why a season would hold a project like Macbeth the Stride, Ocean Filibuster, and 1776, which through marketing copy may seem so unrelated to one another. But when you dig into what these pieces are, you really start to see this through line, right? And particularly starting at the Arboretum, I just think about this conversation to have about the environment, this conversation to have about anti-racism and anti-Blackness that is through these pieces, right there. All these things we started having this conversation about an hour ago, I feel are really directly in these projects that feel really emergent and exciting in that way.
And how all these projects speak to the present moment. I just want to say that, because I feel that is what you're saying. They're really bubbling up. With Ocean Filibuster, I just have to say, we've been working on Ocean Filibuster for a while now, but the idea of filibuster at this moment in our country, talk about the word public health. I think everybody understood the problems with filibustering, but we are so living that. It is probably one of the most pressing issues, right, of this moment in our politics, is how we're going to handle the filibuster. Absolutely. And the ocean. There couldn't be two more pertinent things put together. So that's visionary on the part of. Sorry, Dayron, you're going to.
Oh, you're fine. I think back to Diane and I were having breakfast. Just full disclosure, we were having breakfast again. We like breakfast. That should be our theme, Diane. Diane, I think our things are breakfast. Our thing is breakfast. But we were having breakfast at the office, right across from the office. We grabbed a bite in the Graduate School of Education. And I asked this question about values and pressed this issue of values because truly, I wanted to get to know the organization. I just wanted to understand A.R.T. I was still so new. I wanted to understand what A.R.T. cared about, who A.R.T. was. And Mark, hearing you reflect that you saw alignment with those values and further amplification of the DNA of this place through that work and reflected in the shows that have been previously selected, that was the question. Is A.R.T. the theater I think A.R.T. is? And I think what you're answering is yes, it is. And it's exciting to be on a team that whose work reflects those values.
Well, and to that point, Dayron, let's talk about the staff, because we went through this deep intentional process in the late summer and the fall to do this work. And the point that you're making about, being on the scene a couple months and then we shut down, we actually have quite a few staff members who were in a very similar situation, who were probably under the 6-month mark of service, who faced this. And then so many staff members, who have been here for 15 plus years. all getting to know each other over Zoom in a way that, like, having been in person for years, maybe just had never connected or deepened a relationship because of departments that they were in, that now that we're in this like digital equalizer, right? So many stories of like staff talking about deepening their relationships, but also particularly about the values work, like that everyone on staff dug in deep and had very hard conversations with each other, had very hard conversations between staff and leadership to emerge these pieces that felt like both validating in terms of what we have been wanting to be an institution and clearing in terms of where we need to go or how we can be achieving that. And I think, like, in a time of great uncertainty, when everyone was facing so much emotional trauma outside of the work experience, everyone still showed up and dug into that work, which was hard and really encouraging, right? Really thrilling. And I think connected us as a staff in a way that we had been searching for.
Yeah. I'll say for me, I hadn't bonded with the staff before the shutdown, not really, and hadn't had a chance to get to know a lot of the staff. And so, as you say, on Zoom has been our medium, but then George Floyd got killed, right? And suddenly Black guys surrounded by a lot of white people, and they were strangers. A lot of folks were strangers to me, and the amount of folks who reached out and didn't have the right words, but just wanted me to know that because I had an A.R.T on my badge now, that like they were around. I don't give white people props a lot. Like, that's not my thing. But it was really, for me, again, being isolated, being in a new community, it meant a lot. And Diane, I know with the disgusting attacks on the Asian American community lately, I can only imagine the support that you've gotten from A.R.T, because it feels like A.R.T, by extension Boston, like this city, Bostonians, like, folks show up. They like take care of their own. Like, and if you live in Boston, you become one of them. Like, the way that my neighbors in this neighborhood like made sure that they knew I was new, and they made sure that I felt connected. They made sure that I had what I needed to navigate these hard times. And A.R.T, in a microcosm kind of way, did the same thing in the early summer. And so the support is real, and it matters. And so, again, so happy that we had the chance to go deep, even if it was digitally.
Mm.
I didn't get to any questions because I'm awful.
There's so much to say.
No, but there's a couple of questions that are sharing a similar theme. So I'm going to kind of put them together and reduce them a little bit, because I think when we are looking at what this year has been and trying to plan for what's ahead, it can be really daunting, right? It can be really, it takes so much focus, and it requires so much perseverance. There's so much that's happening. I wonder, though, if we can end today and just share a moment of joy in the last year, something that in this year, and whether that is like about looking ahead, whether that is about what has occurred over the last year, and maybe it's not joy, but like something that has like sparked like vision or encouragement or is helping propel you into this next moment.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I want to soul search that answer a bit, but I know we're pressed on time. I think this idea of slowing down to understand and see things, like, and it's something that I really took from Ned Friedman, who's the director of the Arnold Library. He said, like, how do you look at things? How do you really see? Do we really see? And just what you were saying, Dayron, of like being together, and even digital, reaching out, connecting, listening, and the lessons of doing that in nature. I think, like, just I that's just been a change for me. I'm born and bred Manhattan. I've grown up in like apartment buildings, and that's my life. I don't, I used to walk home from school. And I would cross through, I lived in Lincoln Towers, which is this apartment complex, and there were little bits of grass. And when I used to walk home from school, I would look down at the grass so I could only see the grass. And I would imagine I was in a field in the country. It was the only way I could imagine. It was because I mean, just look at the grass. I was oh, I'm like out in the wilderness. I mean, I had no nature really. I mean, because I was so city, and just, understanding being in tune with nature and the trees and seeing. And that's why I'm so excited for what that means for the Arboretum Project, what it means for seeing, for breathing, for being in touch with each other, human beings, planet, Earth. I feel like that's really a big energizing thing that I'm excited about sinking into more.
Love that. It's actually what we've been talking about, I think, the entire hour. Early in the pandemic, we were asking ourselves questions oh my gosh, what is the digital? How do we shift to digital? How do we pivot? What's our digital content? What's our digital presence? It felt urgent, and it just didn't feel right. Some of those earlier conversations about how we connect with folks in the digital realm early in the pandemic. And one of the things I kept saying was, there will be a moment for us. Right now, we have to go through it. Right now, we have to be sponges and absorb the good, the bad, and ugly of this moment, because we're going to be essential on the other end of this, on the other side of this. And Mark, you invoking essential worker, it feels like not a challenge, but again, a vocation, a commission, something that is bigger than a job. It feels like our time is emerging. The moment when we're needed, the moment when our practice is essential is now. And so that's what propels me forward is that commission, that calling to serve humanity, because that is what artists are here to do. That is literally the purpose. And so, yeah, that's pulling me forward.
I think I'm in a similar place, Dayron, but I think for me, it has been the way that community and individuals have shown up to hold this organization at a time that is, difficult for nonprofits, especially those of us who rely on live performance. The way different folks have shown up to sort of voice their belief in us, and to everything you just said, Dayron, affirm the sort of essential power of what we do, and that this long, what may seem darkness, is actually short in the grand scheme of things, and that there are many years beyond this that A.R.T is going to be so important. And I think, I would be remiss in this year anniversary of the lunchroom to say that and not acknowledge the incredible support that so many folks have shown to this institution, through generous financial support, through encouragement, through showing up, attendance at events. It has been remarkable. I will tell you, a year ago, we did not know if that was going to be there in the way that it has been. And to be on this other year, on this other side, and see how it has shown up and how it has made what we do continue to move forward and allowed us to think about what the next 5 years of the institution is going to look like has been just unimaginable. So it's, as we hit this 103 mark in my signature going over in the lunchroom, I couldn't leave this moment without just expressing the deep gratitude that I know we have institutionally for everyone who has shown up to support us in so many different ways. It's been amazing to watch.
Absolutely.
Amen. Yes.
There is a lot of news coming, y'all. April is going to be a very news-packed A.R.T month. So I just keep your eyes peeled. Lots of exciting events taking us up right to the end of June. We have Hype Man debuting in a week. We have a behind the scenes coming. We have a Civically Speaking coming. We have so many other things coming that I can't tell you about right now because my press and development departments would hate me. So
extension of Conjurers Club.
Absolutely. Yes. So many things happening. Please check us out. Please keep your eyes glued to social media, to your email. We're going to be breaking lots of news in the next month. So
awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us, John.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Dayron. Thank you, Diane.